Imagine you make $60,000 a year. That's solid, respectable, comfortable. Now imagine you never spend a single dollar. No rent, no food, no taxes, nothing. Every single penny goes into savings. How long would it take you to reach Elon Musk's net worth? About 8 million years. 8 million years. That's longer than agriculture has existed, longer than written language, longer than recorded civilization. And here's the crazy part. He might not even be the richest person in history. Because when we go back in time, way back, we don't just find billionaires. We find emperors, conquerors, industrial titans, bankers who financed entire wars, men who didn't just own companies. They owned economies. They owned continents. Some may have controlled half the world's gold supply. So today, we're not just asking who had the biggest number. We're asking something deeper. What does rich actually mean? Is it cash in a vault? Power over millions? Ownership of land? Control of resources? Because depending on how you define it, the richest person in history changes. Let's start with the loudest form of wealth, cash. In the 1980s, one man reportedly made hundreds of millions of dollars every single week. Not through tech stocks, not through investment funds, but in physical bills. Stacks of cash so massive they filled warehouses. Money wrapped in rubber bands. Money hidden in walls. Money buried underground. According to former accounts, millions were lost every year just from mold, water damage, and even rats chewing through stacks. After adjusting for inflation, his estimated net worth lands somewhere around $70 to $80 billion. Huge. Almost unimaginable. But here's the thing. Cash is powerful. Cash feels massive. Cash looks impressive. But it might not be the largest form of wealth history has ever seen. Because some men didn't store money, they controlled entire nations. After World War II, much of Europe was in ruins. The United States emerged strong. The Soviet Union emerged powerful. And at the center of that system stood Joseph Stalin. On paper, Stalin wasn't personally rich. His salary was modest. He didn't live like a diamond-covered monarch. But he controlled a state that stretched across 11 time zones. Factories, oil fields, railways, agriculture, military forces. If you commanded the Soviet Union in the 1940s, you effectively controlled one of the largest economic machines on Earth. So here's the question. If you control an entire economy, are you richer than someone who simply owns shares of one? Because if power equals wealth, then rulers might dominate this list. But power has one weakness. It disappears when control disappears. And that forces us to rethink what real wealth is. Now consider influence. In the early 1900s, a struggling artist in Europe sold small paintings just to survive. Years later, he ruled a nation. Once in power, his image became revenue. Books sold in massive numbers. Speeches printed in newspapers. Royalties collected. The state itself purchased and distributed his work. Influence was converted into income. But that wealth depended entirely on political control. When the regime fell, so did the system supporting it. So maybe true wealth isn't about ruling. Maybe it's about ownership that survives beyond power. That brings us to the industrial age. The late 1800s. Smoke filled the skies. Railroads cut across continents. Steel poured from glowing furnaces. Oil refineries stretched toward the horizon. This was the era of industrial giants. Cornelius Vanderbilt dominated railroads. Andrew Carnegie mastered steel. And John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into a machine that controlled nearly 90% of American oil refining. At his peak in 1913, Rockefeller's fortune equaled roughly 2% of the entire United States economy. Think about that. 2% of everything, produced in the largest growing economy on Earth at the time. Adjusted to today's numbers, estimates place him somewhere between $400 and $600 billion. And unlike emperors, his wealth was private property, legally documented, protected, transferable. This wasn't conquest, it was ownership. But even industrial dominance might not be the ultimate form of wealth, because before corporations, there were bankers who financed entire empires. In the 18th century, one family quietly reshaped European finance. Instead of conquering land, they built networks. 5 sons sent to 5 major financial capitals: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. Before telephones even existed, they created one of the first international banking systems. They financed wars. They financed governments. They funded infrastructure. Kings needed money. This family provided it. And when you finance both sides of conflicts, you rarely lose. Their exact peak fortune is debated, but their influence was undeniable. They didn't rule nations. They made ruling possible. But even banking power may not compare to controlling raw natural resources. In 1324, a ruler from the Mali Empire began a journey across the Sahara. His caravan stretched for miles, thousands of attendants, hundreds of camels, each carrying gold bars, gold dust, gold staffs. When he passed through Cairo, he gave away so much gold that local markets struggled for years afterward. Prices shifted. Inflation followed. The metal that symbolized ultimate wealth flooded the system. The ruler was Mansa Musa. Mali sat on some of the richest gold reserves in the world at the time. Some historians estimate his wealth at around $400 billion in today's terms. Others argue it was simply beyond calculation. Because how do you measure wealth when you control the supply of the world's most valuable resource? But even gold isn't the original form of wealth. Before gold, there was land. In the 1200s, one man built the largest contiguous land empire in history. The Mongol Empire stretched across Asia into Europe, nearly a quarter of the world's landmass. If you tried to calculate the economic value of that territory today, the numbers would become almost incomprehensible. But here's what makes it fascinating. Genghis Khan didn't hoard treasure for himself. He redistributed loot among his warriors. He lived more simply than the scale of his empire might suggest. So by territory, he may have been unmatched. But by personal net worth, that's less certain. Which brings us even further back. Ancient Rome. The year is 01 AD. Rome stands as one of the most powerful civilizations on Earth. At its center is Augustus. After defeating his rivals, he annexed Egypt, not just politically, but personally. Egypt was wealthy, fertile, and strategically vital. By some estimates, Augustus effectively controlled around 20% of Rome's total economic output: taxes, mines, tribute, agricultural production. He didn't just rule an empire. He commanded its revenue streams. After his death, he was declared a god. And in economic terms, his control would equal trillions today. But here's the challenge. Ancient wealth is incredibly difficult to measure precisely. Records are incomplete. Numbers are debated. Comparisons across centuries are messy. So who actually wins? Here's the truth. There isn't one simple answer. If we measure by share of national economy, Rockefeller stands near the top. If we measure by gold reserves, Mansa Musa dominates the conversation. If we measure by land control, Genghis Khan towers over history. If we measure by imperial economic command, Augustus becomes almost untouchable. And if we measure by verified modern net worth, Elon Musk leads in the largest global economy humanity has ever created. And that detail matters. Today's economic system is bigger than anything in history. So being the richest person today means owning a massive share of the largest financial machine ever built. Wealth evolves. Power evolves. Economies evolve. And the title of richest person in history depends entirely on how you define richness itself. So maybe the better question isn't, who was the richest? Maybe the better question is, what kind of wealth actually matters? And that is for you to decide. That was it. Like and subscribe for more knowledge with your favorite knowledge lion. See you next time.